All right, we're heading back in time to the early 20th century in South India to look at one of the most radical and honestly one of the most creative social movements of its time, the non-Brahmin movement. This is basically a story of how a huge majority of people decided, you know what, we're going to rewrite the rules of our society completely.
And it all really kicks off with questions just like this one from the intellectual pioneer Ayodhya Das. Now, Aparacheri is a segregated hamlet, for the lowest castes. So what he's really asking here is, when we talk about a nation, about a motherland, who actually gets included in that picture? It's a single, sharp question that just cuts right to the heart of the social order they were so determined to overturn.
So to really get what this rebellion was all about, we have to understand the world it was rebelling against. We're talking about the Tamil country in the early 1900s, a society just built on a rigid caste hierarchy. And this movement, it was a direct, head-on response to that.
At its heart, non-Brahmanism was this powerful challenge. And it wasn't just about politics, not at all. It was about fundamentally questioning who held power in literally every part of life, from the government office to the local temple, and asking why.
And just look at this. It lays out how stark the difference really was. On one side, you've got the Brahmins, a small minority, but holding this immense, disproportionate power. And then on the other side, you have the non-Brahmins, the overwhelming majority of people. But they were systematically shut out from power, from education, and even from sacred religious spaces.
I mean, what a brilliant way to describe it, this acrobat's trick. It's not just a simple ladder, it's this precarious human pyramid of oppression. This analogy is so creative and memorable, and it just perfectly captures that sense of injustice that fueled the whole movement. A system where one group's position at the top depended entirely on pushing others down.
But here's the thing. This rebellion didn't really start with protests in the streets. It started with books and ideas. The intellectual groundwork was laid by a real trailblazer, Ayodhya Das, and his form of resistance was deeply, deeply creative. He understood that if you want to change the future, you first have to reclaim the past. This is such a powerful idea, semiotic conquest. Basically, Das believed the caste system wasn't just held up by laws, but by stories. He argued that the dominant narratives had pretty much conquered meaning itself, rewriting history to completely erase the past of marginalized communities and lock them into their low status. It was a war fought with words, myths, and text. So what was his counterattack? Well, it was this incredible act of creative deconstruction. First, he went and rediscovered a forgotten history, arguing that the so-called untouchables were actually descended from respected Buddhists. Then he claimed that the sacred texts being used to justify caste had been deliberately faked by what he called Vaishya Brahmins, or false prophets. And finally, he worked to reclaim his people's identity by taking apart the very words used to oppress them.
So Das laid all this amazing intellectual groundwork. But, ideas need a spark to catch fire. And that spark was another towering figure, E.V. Ramasamy, who you probably know as Periyar. He was the one who took these radical ideas and turned them into a fire-breathing mass movement that would shake society to its very core.
And you can see the shift happening right here. The movement kind of begins with the Justice Party, which was mostly focused on politics, on getting representation. But then, 1925 is the crucial year. Periyar makes a clean break. He literally walks out of the mainstream Congress Party because he's so frustrated with their refusal to tackle caste head-on, and he launches his own radical project, the self-respect movement.
And wow, the two could not have been more different. The Justice Party was about working within the system. The self-respect movement, it was about blowing the system up from the outside. It was grassroots, a true mass movement filled with what the source calls a subversive energy. They weren't just asking for a seat at the table. They wanted to smash the table and build a whole new house.
Okay, this is where the story gets really, really colorful. Because Periyar and his followers, the self-respecters, they weren't just thinkers. Oh no, they were masters of public spectacle and creative defiance, using shocking, theatrical methods to get their message out there.
At the very center of Periyar's philosophy was this idea that religion was the glue holding the entire caste system together. So he attacked it head-on with statements just like this. I mean, this wasn't quiet, polite atheism. This was a loud, public, provocative declaration of war on the whole idea of divine justification for social inequality.
But for Periyar, words were never, ever enough. His atheism wasn't just some belief you held in your head, it was a call to action. He believed that to truly break the mental chains of tradition, you had to get out there and show people how absurd it all was, in the most public,
colorful, and unforgettable ways you could think of.
And this led to this incredible culture of creative defiance. I mean, take self-respect marriages. They just cut out the priest and all the religious rituals completely. Or imagine public parodies of sacred texts, turning these revered stories into subversive comedies. These were acts of pure political theater. From organizing agitations to enter temples to publicly breaking idols, it was all designed to shock people into questioning everything they took for granted.
And if all that wasn't radical enough for you, the movement was astonishingly ahead of its time on gender. Seriously, we're talking decades before these ideas went mainstream. Periyar was out there arguing for a woman's right to sexual desire, rejecting chastity as a tool of male control, advocating for birth control, and demanding that women be seen as equal citizens and partners, not as property. It was a complete social revolution.
So what was the real impact of all this subversive creative energy? Well, the movement didn't just want to reform society. It had a vision that was so much more ambitious than that.
And don't think for a second that this was some fringe movement. As this number shows, it was a widespread grassroots phenomenon. You had nearly 118 of these self-respect clubs popping up all over the place, from big cities to the tiniest villages. They were these spontaneous hubs of radical thought, which just shows you how deeply these ideas resonated with ordinary people.
And this, right here, was the ultimate goal. They weren't just trying to pass a few new laws. They were trying to perform a kind of cultural surgery, to change the very common sense of society. The aim was to replace a whole worldview that was based on tradition and hierarchy with a brand new one, founded on reason, equality, and, most importantly, self-respect. And that leaves us with this final thought. The non-Brahmin movement literally called itself a movement towards a new millennium. It was a dream of a completely different kind of future, and you can still feel its echoes in the politics and society of South India today. So when you look back at their incredible creative rebellion, you just have to ask yourself, what does it really take? Not just to criticize the world as it is, but to passionately, creatively, and bravely dream of a new